It was supposed to be a calm Thursday morning in Los Angeles. Morgan Freeman sat comfortably on the set of a morning talk show, his presence filling the room with a quiet gravitas. The host, Emma Larson, smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling as she asked him about his latest film. The audience clapped gently, sipping coffee, basking in the familiar richness of his voice. But then, out of nowhere, Emma paused. "We have something special for you today," she said, her tone shifting to one of quiet anticipation. She reached under her seat and pulled out a plain brown envelope. No markings, just one line written in careful script. From President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso. The studio fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Morgan took the envelope, his fingers tracing the edges as if it were something sacred. His hands trembled ever so slightly. Emma didn't speak again. The audience leaned forward, breaths held. He slowly opened the flap. Inside was a single handwritten letter. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, something shifted in his expression. His easy smile faded. His lips parted, but no words came. Then his voice cracked. The room was pin-drop quiet. The world was about to witness something no one had ever seen. Morgan's fingers tightened around the paper. His eyes, usually calm and commanding, began to glisten. For a man who had spent decades on camera, this moment was raw, unguarded. He cleared his throat and began to read, his voice soft but heavy with emotion. To the voice that carried our stories when we were forgotten. To the man who brought dignity to our pain with every word spoken. The room sank deeper into silence. The camera zoomed gently on his face. His hands shook. "You didn't just act. You healed. You didn't just narrate. You resurrected our dignity." His voice broke again. A single tear traced a slow path down his cheek. Emma, visibly moved, stayed silent, giving him space. "I am writing from a country many have overlooked, but not you. In your voice, we heard ourselves. In your roles, we saw our fathers, our hopes." Morgan stopped. He couldn't read further. He lowered the letter to his lap, covered his face with both hands, and let out a quiet sob. The man who had narrated the world's pain was now living his own moment of raw truth. And it was all because of a letter from a president no one expected. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then a soft sob came from the audience. A woman in the front row had tears streaming down her face. A man beside her clutched his chest, visibly shaken. Morgan tried to gather himself, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. I wasn't ready for this," he whispered, his voice trembling. This is different." He looked at Emma, his eyes still wet. "I've received awards, standing ovations, honorary degrees. But no letter, no gesture has ever done this to me." Emma reached for his hand, not as a host comforting a guest, but as one human connecting with another in a moment of profound vulnerability. She turned to the camera and said softly, "You just witnessed something real, something rare. A message from one leader to another, across oceans, across time." Behind the scenes, producers were frozen. No one dared cut to commercial. Online, the clip was already going viral, shared with a simple caption, "Morgan Freeman cries on live TV, and we cried with him." But what was in the rest of the letter? That mystery was only just beginning. That night, Morgan didn't sleep. The letter rested on his nightstand, open beside a dim lamp. He read it again and again, each time slower than the last. There was a paragraph he hadn't shared on air, too personal, too intense. "I grew up in a small village in northern Burkina Faso," it read. "We had no running water, no electricity. But once a month, a truck would come with a generator and a screen, and we watched movies." Morgan paused, his hand over his chest. "The first voice I ever heard in English was yours. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them." Tears welled up again. The next morning, Morgan called the show's producers. "I want to finish reading the letter on air," he said, his voice resolute. The producers hesitated. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't part of the promo tour. But after seeing the reaction online, millions of views overnight, they agreed. Morgan would return to finish what began. But neither he nor the world was ready for what came next. The studio was packed. Cameras were ready. No music, no intro, just silence. Morgan Freeman walked onto the stage, the letter in hand. No script, no teleprompter. Emma greeted him, but he simply nodded, looked at the audience, and began. This letter is not just for me. It's for all of us. He read the next part aloud. When I became a soldier, I carried your words in my heart. Hope is a thing with feathers, you once quoted. I remembered that every night in the forest. The room went quiet again. Mr. Freeman, your voice gave me courage. I now lead a country that still fights for its breath, but I've never forgotten that voice. That voice gave me back my name. Emma gasped softly. Morgan paused, looking up slowly, his eyes heavy. Ow! How does a man respond to something like this? People at home were crying. Comments flooded social media. This is not a letter. This is a mirror to the soul. But the letter wasn't done yet, and the most emotional part hadn't even been revealed. Just as Morgan was folding the letter, a small photo slipped out and fluttered to the floor. He picked it up slowly. It was a black and white image, a little boy barefoot, standing in front of a torn sheet hung between two sticks. A makeshift movie screen. Other children sat on logs, staring at the image of Nelson Mandela being portrayed on the screen. Morgan's voice caught. That's me, he whispered. That's from Invictus. Emma leaned in. You were their hero. Morgan flipped the photo over. In careful handwriting, it read, This is the night I decided I would one day help my people. And you, your voice, gave me that dream. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera crew wiped their eyes. Then Morgan turned to the live camera. President Traore, if you are watching, please know this. Your letter changed me. It reminded me why I ever stepped in front of camera. Backstage, producers were getting calls from major networks. People weren't just watching, they were feeling. And millions around the world were waiting to hear what came next. While the letter was making headlines across the world, a quiet but urgent request arrived from Ouagadougou to Los Angeles. President Ibrahim Traoré wanted to meet Morgan Freeman privately. No cameras, no press, just a meeting between two men, one who spoke through film and the other who lived its message. At first, Morgan hesitated. His schedule was packed, his heart still shaken from the letter. But something about those words wouldn't let him rest. 3 days after the broadcast, Morgan boarded a plane, destination, Burkina Faso. On board, he stared out the window, clutching the folded letter. He whispered to himself, I need to look this man in the eye. As the plane crossed the Atlantic, social media buzzed with hashtags like the letter that broke Freeman and Traore and Morgan. But none of them knew this journey was about to uncover something far deeper, something buried in Morgan's own past, something he had never shared with the world. And it all connected back to a dusty village, a projector screen, and a boy with a dream. The sun was just rising when the jet touched down in Burkina Faso. Morgan was greeted with little fanfare, just a single government car and a translator named Amina. On the drive, Amina spoke softly. The president, he doesn't show this side to many. But your letter, it meant everything to him. Morgan looked at her. Why me? She smiled. Because you gave him hope when hope was hard to find. They drove through villages waking to life. Women fetching water, children walking barefoot to school, men fixing broken bicycles. Everything felt so real, so grounded. When they arrived at the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré was already waiting. He wore no suit, no medals, just a plain shirt and calm eyes. Morgan stepped out of the car, slowly. The two men looked at each other. No words, just silence. Then a quiet, mutual nod. Traoré stepped forward, holding a faded photo. Do you remember this boy? Morgan took it. It was the same black and white photo from the letter, but now clearer. The boy's eyes, they were hauntingly familiar. Wait, this child looks like my cousin, Morgan whispered. Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder. He wasn't just watching you. He was waiting for you. Inside the compound, the president led Morgan to a quiet garden. No bodyguards, no aides. Under a wide tree, Traoré began to speak, not as a politician, but as a boy who remembered. After my father died, I lost everything, he said. But I found a new father through a voice, a voice that told stories, that gave broken people dignity. Morgan sat in silence, his hands trembling slightly. Then Traore leaned in. There's something I never told the world. I had a brother. His name was Kofi. He looked exactly like you. Morgan's breath caught. I had a cousin named Kofi. We lost him. No one ever found out where he went. Traore reached into a folder and pulled out a worn paper. It was a photo of Kofi standing beside a younger Traore, both smiling. Morgan froze. We shared stories about you every night, until the day he disappeared. Suddenly, it was no longer just about the letter. It was about family, history, pain. The past wasn't just meeting the present. It was calling out for healing. And Morgan knew there was more to this journey than he ever imagined. Morgan walked slowly beside President Traore through a quiet village outside the capital. Children waved, unaware of the weight these two men carried. Traore stopped near a faded wall and pointed. Scratched faintly into the brick was a name, Kofi Freeman. Morgan froze. This was his name. After he left America, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Traore nodded. He said he wanted to keep your family name to honor you. Morgan knelt, brushing the wall gently with his fingertips. The name looked like it had been there for decades. He always said he wanted to become like you, but he couldn't go back. Why? Morgan asked, his throat dry. Traore looked away. There was something he felt ashamed of, something he never told me. He said the Freeman name deserved more than what he had become. Morgan's eyes filled with tears. He was just a boy. The air grew heavy. This wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a return to something long buried, grief, guilt, and a chance for healing. But the most painful truth was yet to come. President Traore led Morgan to an old building, a quiet one-room house. This was Kofi's room, he said gently. We kept it just the way he left it. Morgan stepped inside. Dust hung in the light beams coming through a cracked window. On a small wooden shelf sat old VHS tapes, books in English, and a single torn photo of Morgan smiling on the set of Lean on Me. Next to it was a journal. Morgan opened it, and his hands trembled as he read the first page. To my cousin Morgan, whom I love more than he'll ever know. I didn't run away. I was taken, but I stayed because here I was needed. Tears slid down Morgan's face. Kofi had been kidnapped from America as a teenager. Somehow, after escaping, he never returned. He taught me English, Traore said softly. He taught many of us, and he helped build this village's school. He saved lives. Morgan sank onto the edge of the bed, speechless. He had mourned Kofi, grieved him as lost. But now he was learning he had been a hero. That night, Morgan sat outside under the stars, holding Kofi's journal to his chest. President Traore joined him, holding a second letter. This one, he said quietly, was meant for you. Kofi wrote it, but he never mailed it. He gave it to me before he passed. Morgan's breath caught. He opened the fragile envelope with care. Inside was a handwritten letter, aged but clean. Dear Morgan, I still hear your voice in my dreams. When things got hard, I thought about your roles, your power, your strength. I didn't come back because I was scared you'd forgotten me. But I never forgot you. You gave me the courage to stay and help. I may have disappeared from your world, but you never disappeared from mine. I hope one day you'll come here and see what your voice helped build. With love, your little brother, Kofi. Morgan broke. He wept, not with shame, but with gratitude, pain, and love tangled all at once. For the first time, the silence he'd carried for years was broken, and the journey was not yet over. Morgan Freeman and President Ibrahim Traoré sat in the courtyard under a dim lantern, the letter from Kofi still resting on Morgan's lap, as if his cousin had just spoken. Traoré broke the silence, his voice gentle. Kofi never stopped helping, even after he fell ill. Morgan looked up sharply. He was sick. Traoré nodded. Malaria. He refused to leave the village. He said his story had to end where it started, with the people. Morgan held back tears. He died here. Traoré handed him another item, a faded photograph of Kofi, smiling weakly, surrounded by children holding books. He taught them to read using your movie scripts, Traoré said with a faint smile. The Shawshank Redemption, Invictus, They knew every line. Morgan's heart clenched. He had always believed fame was his greatest legacy. Now he saw otherwise. It wasn't the roles he played on screen, but the hope his voice gave to someone the world had forgotten. And in that hope, Kofi had found his purpose. Now perhaps Morgan could find his too, but Traore had one more surprise, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The next morning, Morgan was driven deep into a rural community. Children followed the car, waving and smiling, their energy contagious. They stopped near a dusty path. Ahead stood a small school building, freshly painted. Above the entrance, a hand-carved sign read, Kofi Freeman Community School for Hope. Morgan's hands flew to his mouth. Traore stepped beside him and said softly, "This school exists because of him. And because of you." Morgan stepped inside. The walls were covered in student drawings, the classroom filled with laughter and voices reading in English. A teacher greeted him and handed him a notebook. Inside were messages from his students. "Dear Morgan Freeman, thank you for making my teacher dream big. Your voice helped us believe. Kofi said you were a king. We think you are too." Morgan sat down on a small bench, overwhelmed. He never expected his legacy would live here, in Burkina Faso, in a small school built from sacrifice, brotherhood, and a love that stretched across continents. He looked at Traore and whispered, "You've done more than just lead, Mr. President. You've healed a part of me I never thought could be healed." Before Morgan's flight home, Traore invited him to a small evening gathering with the villagers. No cameras, no press, just people. An old man played soft music on a kora, and children performed a skit based on Morgan's film The Bucket List. Everyone laughed, even Morgan. At the end, Traore stood and held a wooden box carved with West African patterns. He opened it and handed Morgan a medal. "This is not from the government," he said. "This is from the people, for the man who gave us a voice before we had one." Morgan took it, speechless. In that moment, he wasn't an actor or a celebrity. He was just a man who had unknowingly touched a world he never saw. As the stars shone above, Morgan whispered a prayer under his breath. For Kofi, for the children, for Traore. "Thank you," he said, voice trembling. Traore smiled. "No, thank you." And just like that, a wound that had been open for decades finally closed. But the world wasn't done with this story. 3 days after returning to the United States, Morgan Freeman appeared on a national news program for what was meant to be a brief segment about his trip to Africa. But when the cameras rolled, the unexpected happened again. Morgan placed a letter from Ibrahim Traoré on the table. "This," he said, voice cracking, "is the most powerful letter I've ever read in my life." He paused, then, with trembling hands, began reading a part not shared before. "Dear Morgan, you have unknowingly mentored millions in Africa. Your voice reached my people before any government aid ever did. When we had no electricity, your words still played through old radios powered by hope." Morgan stopped. His voice broke. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "He called me a light. But he doesn't know he became mine." The studio fell silent. No cues, no edits, just raw emotion. Within hours, the moment exploded online. Millions watched. Millions cried. But most importantly, millions now knew the name Ibrahim Traoré and why one letter could change everything. The days that followed were surreal. Major news outlets picked up the story, and Freeman and Traoré trended globally. Schools requested copies of the letter. A prominent talk show host, moved by the broadcast, called it a masterclass in humanity. Emails flooded Morgan's inbox from teachers in South Africa, youth leaders in Brazil, even a prison chaplain in the United States. Each echoed the same truth. This letter didn't just speak to Morgan Freeman. It spoke to all of us. Donations poured in to support the Kofi Freeman Community School in Burkina Faso. In just 48 hours, enough was raised to build 3 more schools across the region. Then came a surprise. Ibrahim Traoré released a short video. No soot, no flags. Just him standing beside school children under the setting sun. "This is not a story about one man," he said. "It's about all of us. About choosing compassion, even when no one is watching. Let's build more light together." His calm words echoed around the world. He didn't ask for praise, but the world gave it anyway. Not as a politician, but as a humble servant of the people. 1 week after the letter was first read, Morgan Freeman returned to his quiet home in Mississippi. He placed the letter inside a glass frame above his writing desk. But he didn't stop there. He announced a new foundation, the Kofi Project, Stories That Heal. Its mission, to fund education and storytelling initiatives in underserved African communities. The first partner? The Office of the President of Burkina Faso. In his first live stream event for the project, Morgan looked directly into the camera. "I used to think my greatest legacy was on film," he said, "but I was wrong. It was in a letter from a man who saw the world not as it is, but as it could be." He smiled softly, and it all began with a boy named Kofi and a leader named Ibrahim Traoré. The screen faded to black with one final image, a candle being passed from one child to another across the globe.